With this session, we will conclude our conference and build a bridge between 1821 and 2021. As was the case with all previous panels, I kindly ask all three panelists to adhere to the 20-minute limit. So our first panelist will be Professor Suppan, who is joining us from Vienna. Professor Suppan is an Austrian historian who studies Eastern Europe in the 20th century. He's a faculty member of the Andrássy University of Budapest and the University of Vienna. He was Secretary General of the Austrian Academy of Science from 2009 to 2011 and Vice President from 2011 till 2013. He was also the director of the Institute of Eastern Europe History at the University of Vienna. Among his many works, I will point out only his book with the title Hitler bene Tito, National Conflicts, World Wars, Genocides, Expulsions and Divided Remembrance in East Central and Southeastern Europe 1848 till 2018. Professor Suppan will present us his paper with the title After the Holy Alliance, Diplomacy of Empires and National States. Professor Suppan, the floor, or better, the Zoom is yours.
Good afternoon to all, especially to Gregor and the other Slovene colleagues in Ljubljana. As you know, during the Congress of Vienna, there was a general agreement between the great powers that some measures should be taken to maintain the peace settlements and to guard against the recurrence of war. But in the long run, efforts to establish a guarantee of the peace terms intended with the Quadruple Alliance failed when the successor of Lord Castlereagh's, Robert Canning, refused to cooperate with the conservative powers after 1822. Only the Holy Alliance lasted until the Crimean War. As you know, in 1815, Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe belonged to four empires, only to four empires, three old and larger empires, the Russian, Habsburg, and Ottoman empires, and one new empire, the Prussian Empire. I would like to stress the main steps of changing this map until the present time. Looking to the years beginning with 1830 until, as you will, it depends from the 20 minutes, to 1995. We should recognize that these four empires of 1815 changed or were changed over approximately 180 or 90 years to exactly 30 nation states, from Finland over Poland, not to forget Slovenia, of course, Greece, to Azerbaijan. So I would like to point out some steps over this almost 200 years, how were coming these changes of the map in Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe until the Caspian Sea. No doubt the lands between the German and the Russian, as well the Italian and Turkish areas, were for long periods a Jetta zone of empires before they achieved national government. However, the Czech historian Miroslav Roch argued that one could not construct national movements and modern nations ex nihilo, and that there must be some pre-existing linguistic, historic, cultural, economic, political, and or geographical conditions that distinguished each group. parallel to the building of ethnic groups and nations, we have to consider also the long-term impacts of the Habsburg, Tsarist, Prussian, and Ottoman empires on these groups concerning the law, public administration, school system, civil society, and social structures. The first change of the Vienna Congress system started with the Greek Revolt, as you know, in 1821, with the proclamation of Alexander Ypsilantis, etc., with revolutionary Philike Heteria, etc. However, the growing prosperity of Greek grain traders, a cultural renaissance, the influence of the French Revolution and Napoleon's continental blockade, as well as some encouragement of Russia, stimulated Greeks in other regions. So this is a sign, even for later times, how different empires stimulated specific national movements and the nation-building process of specific ethnic groups until the present time, we should say. Think to the Albanian question, for example, at the end of the 20th century. The Greek Revolution was by no means a national crusade in which all Greeks fought against the Turks. There were differences between the cosmopolitan Phanariotes, especially in Constantinople, against the guerrilla chieftains on the Peloponnese, high prelates against village priests, wealthy ship owners against unemployed sailors, powerful primates against landless peasants. So this is also a model for later revolts, that not all people in a national movement fought on one side for the national independence. Unfortunately, the Greek revolt was accompanied with some massacres from Turks, from Greeks first against the Turks, the Peloponnese, then from the Turks against the Greeks, even against the Greek patriarch, etc. So the great powers, especially Russia and Britain, tried to intervene. We should not underestimate the Philo-Hellenism from Germany to England and France, etc. You know Lord Byron, the name of Lord Byron, etc. So at the end, after the famous Battle of Navarino and the Russian army crossing the Balkan mountains, the great powers agreed in the London Conference for a complete independence of Greece, but only of a very small new nation state at the end south of the Volos-Arta line. So only the Peloponnese, some islands of the Cyclades, and a part of so-called middle Greece until the Volos-Arta line in the north. And it lasted then over 1 century until the 1920s to find the Greek borders of present time. Not to forget that the last accession was the Dodecanese in 1947, when Italy had to give up this islands to Greece after World War II. The next step was in the air, so to say, with the Crimean War, but this was more a war between the great powers, some promises to the Danubian principalities, to the Serbs, but the great powers agreed more within themselves, looking to the straits and to the Danubian principalities and the mouths of the Danube, etc. More important was then the Congress of Berlin in 1878. So in the historiography, there are some comparisons between the Congress of Vienna and the Congress of Berlin, starting with an insurrection in Herzegovina and Bosnia against the Ottoman rule there, and then with the uprising of the Montenegrins, the Serbs, and the Bulgarians. However, without the intervention of the great powers, the Ottomans would have crushed the uprisers. Nevertheless, Russia sent troops over the Balkan mountains. The British sent a fleet into the straits, partly against the Russians. So Reich Chancellor Bismarck became then the great mediator in the Berlin Congress in the summer of 1878. And they bargained some decisions between giving Serbia, Romania, Montenegro independence, but only in a part of the ethnic realm of the Serbs, Romanians, and the Montenegrins. The Bulgaria was divided in 3 parts and without independence, while Russia took some lands in the Transcaucasian realm, and the British occupied Cyprus. So it was a mixture, and many wishes of the Bulgarian Serbs and Greeks maintained unfulfilled, as well as the aspirations of the Russian and Pan-Slav nationalists. The annexation crisis in 1908-09 was certainly a smaller step belonging to the question of Bosnia-Herzegovina, when the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister Ehrenthal proclaimed the annexation without asking the British and the French, only the Russians and the Germans. It was not so clear, his the proclamation, and the annexation crisis is important because the behavior of the Ballhausplatz in 1908 and 1909 was then important for the July crisis in 1914, because the Ballhausplatz lost the confidence in Paris and in London, and many British and French politicians and diplomats thought, also Russian diplomats, that always Germany is standing behind the Ballhausplatz and pushing Austro-Hungary against Russia or against Serbia, etc. It's interesting to see a next step during the Balkan Wars, when the great powers stood more in behind, in the shadow, so to say, while the Balkan nations crushed the Ottoman armies, and then in a second step, the neighbors of the Bulgarians crushed Bulgaria. So the end of the Balkan Wars was also not in the content of all Balkan people. peoples. As I said, in the July crisis 1914 played the annexation crisis a specific role at the very beginning. And we shouldn't forget that neither Russia had a specific demand against Austria-Hungary, meaning Galicia or Bukovina, or against Germany, meaning East Prussia, or in Poland, and the same vice versa from Germany to Russia or from Austria-Hungary to Russia. But the Balkan crisis stood between, and the French policy stood behind Russia, and then the British policy behind France and Russia. As the Australian, I should say, British historian Christopher Clark wrote in his masterpiece, The Sleepwalkers, that I should quote this. Moreover, the complexity of 1940 crisis arose not from diffusion of powers and responsibilities across a single political financial framework, but from rapid-fire interactions among heavily armed autonomous power centers, confronting different and swiftly changing threats and operating under conditions of high risk and low trust and transparency. When I wrote a review on this book, I only criticized the title and said he shouldn't speak from sleepwalkers, but from warmongers. We can see the warmongers in Vienna, in St. Petersburg, in Berlin, in Paris, in London, and last but not least, in Belgrade. When I told this to Christopher Clark, he agreed with me, but he said the publishing house was against such an aggressive title. No, it's not a joke. So now the Versailles Order. The Versailles Order changed the whole of Central Eastern, Southeastern Europe, and not to speak from Middle East until the Persian Gulf. It's interesting to see that the situation in 1918 changed totally. First, Germany forced Russia to a very bad treaty. I would say Kazakhstanian treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and then 8 months later, Germany had to retreat not only from the west but also from the east because of the armistice of Compiègne against the Western powers. So this was, so to say, the luck for many new nations building a nation state, from Finland to Georgia. And of course, for the new Yugoslavia, the new Poland, Czechoslovakia, etc. However, the building of more than a dozen new nation states, I have to short, let's see, exactly 14 nation states in Europe, Finland, even the new Turkey. And this building had some different standards in drawing the new borders, in breaching the principle of national self-determination, and in creating more than 25 million new national minorities outside Russia, so in between Germany and Russia and Italy and Turkey. And the new minority treaties did not fulfill this question of new national minorities, as you know. And the minority question were used then, especially by Hitler and also by Stalin, to destroy the order of Versailles. But we should also respect the economic consequences of the dissolution of the empires, especially of the Habsburg monarchy, when iron industries were separated from the coal mines, for example, or weaving mills from the spinning mills, or wheat fields from the mill industries, also the railway network in East Central Europe, etc. Looking to the economic policy between the wars, we can state a permanent state of customs war between many states, and in the Great Depression, this customs war became a great danger for the most of the new nation states. The next step came after World War II, when now the new three world powers, the United States, the USSR, and Great Britain, made a new order at Potsdam and then at Paris, dividing Germany, giving the eastern part of Germany to Poland, pushing Poland to the west, from the east to the west, a demand of Stalin, and drafting peace treaties with Italy, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Finland. Now Italy lost minority lands in the east, the Venezia Giulia, for example, or the Dodecanese, and Romania lost Bessarabia or northern Bukovina. Surprisingly, Bulgaria retained the southern Dobruja, annexed in September 1940. So the only regulation under the command of Hitler, which was prolonged after 1945. Even Hungary lost some communities east of Austria in the south of Bratislava, and Finland had to accept the borders of 1940 after the war against the Soviet Union. The last step came with the revolutions of 1989, 91, and its consequences when the East Central European countries tested the Gorbachev new thinking, which proclaimed that each country had the right to choose its own political and economic system without any attempt of a military intervention, like in 1968. He indirectly inspired national and social revolutions, and one country after another in the Soviet bloc became independent. We shouldn't forget that not only the East German communists, but also the Czechoslovak communists hoped until the last minute on a Soviet intervention, but Gorbachev ordered the Soviet troops to maintain in the barracks. We shouldn't forget this very important order by Gorbachev. I cannot go now, especially with the Slovene colleagues, through the dissolution process of Yugoslavia, but I should only said a personal memory when I spoke in 1990 with a German diplomat in Vienna about this dissolution process, and he answered, now it's the time for unification and not for dissolution. So I understood that he understood nothing of what was going on in Yugoslavia. Yeah? And he was not alone under the Western politicians and the Western diplomats. Even James Baker, the Secretary of State, told in Belgrade a week before Slovenia and Croatia declared independence, Yugoslavia should maintain as a unity without military measures, etc., etc. So the last conference, conference of great powers, was then the conference in Paris in December 1995, after I would say, the armistice in Dayton, Ohio, to regulate the Bosnian crisis and to establish the situation in Bosnia. Nevertheless, after this last Congress of the great powers in Paris, a new round was opened then with the Albanian uprising and the Serbian countermeasures, and last but not least, then the declaration of independence of Albania in February 2008. So I can conclude this very quick march through 2 centuries that we can see from 1815, from the Vienna Congress, to the last decade, dissolution process of empires in favor of building nation states, larger and smaller nation states. And I'm not sure if this processes, especially outside Europe, is finished. Looking to Africa or to the Middle East. Thank you very much for your attention.